Hello, everybody, and welcome back to DJ Tutorials. This is the next part of the LuxCore Crash Course series, and this one's going to be dealing with how to set PBR materials inside of your scene. If you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and take a look at the downloaded installation where I do a brief overview. And if you could please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, that really helps me out. Now, let's jump into Blender here, and I'm going to make a disclaimer. I am using the new 2.5 beta 1, which resolves a lot of issues if you're using AMD GPUs. And I will go into a couple of those things later, and I will put a link to where you can download the beta build in the comments or the in the description below. So if you don't have a fixed version or version 2.5 is not out by the time you're seeing this, you have access to that if you are an AMD user. So what we have here is I basically just have a plane that's been split into two pieces to make a ramp effect with a bevel modifier. And just to keep things simple, we're not going to be doing procedural generation of the textures here. We're going to be doing this with a simple UV unwrap. So just to show you, I have the image or the pieces unwrapped here. Very simple grid fashion. And you can see based on this right here, it sort of unwraps in that way. So if we jump over to the shading tab right here, it will automatically show up like it does with cycles with the EV engine. So you'll see your geometric object here and whatever the material is presented here. And what we'll want to do is we'll actually want to preview this with the viewport shading here. And just so you know, mine is going to be a little bit faster. I do have some pretty high-end cards in my computer, but LuxCore is pretty fast as it is, as long as you're not using the light tracing and you have a decent GPU. Now, for those of you who are newer, down here on the bottom left, I'm going to be having the screencast keys. So you can see there's middle mouse there and all that. And then right below that, you're going to see the keyboard presses and the mouse button presses in case you get a little bit lost or if this ends up not working over here with the screencast keys. Now, to make this fairly simple, what we're going to do here is a basic material. And I'm going to turn on the overlays here so we know what's selected. So we're going to go over here to the materials tab. And the first thing that you'll really need to understand about this is that if you already have a material placed in here that was let's say you opened up a fresh default cube and there was already a material there, you might see a little button, and I'll just click on the cube one here. That's invisible, so forgive me for not showing it to you yet. But you see this right here. It says use cycles nodes. So you can actually use a lot of the cycles materials and the whole method on how you can do things in cycles with it. So if you do prefer that, you can do it right here by clicking this button. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to do this according to the LuxCore materials, which are really, really, really good. So you'll want to kind of know before you head into this that you want to start using LuxCore so that you don't have to repurpose a lot of your materials and your textures. But it is rather easy to convert and all that. And I really don't think I need to do a series on that because you can just use the cycles materials anyway. So what you'll see here on the right, you'll see that there are some node tree presets. And if you click one of these buttons, it's going to make an automatic material for you that you can start filling out some information for. So for this particular series, I'm going to show you how to make PBR materials, and that is going to be based off of this one that they call Disney. And when you click this button, you'll see that it looks very, very familiar. And one thing that I'll want to point out right now so that you're really aware, because it's very confusing for new users, is that over here, where you go to the editor type, you're going to see that there's a new slot. There's a LuxCore material slot, and there's also the shader editor. And if you go into the shader editor, which you're used to for materials, you'll see that it's completely blank. And this is for cycles. So if you did have cycles materials, if I clicked on the cube here, you can see that there are cycles materials there with the principled BSDF. And if I go back to, if I click here, I go back to the LuxCore material nodes. If you click on that, you can see that you have a new set of materials right in there, or the new set of node tree and materials. So let's go ahead and go back to the plane here, and let's go ahead and start. So just like with your basic materials node for the principled BSDF, you have your base color, subsurface, metallic, specular, roughness, anisotropic if you're using metallics, specular tint. You have all of these things here that you normally would see inside of your principled BSDF node, including a bump input, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and an emission. So basically, everything is here. One of the newest additions to at least 2.4 and above is this one, and I'm just going to save this really quick. Let's save this out. Tutorial, save. And you'll see this thin coat, and I'll just show you what this is right now. So if you click this button here, and let's change the color a little bit, you'll see that there's sort of like an oil slick pattern that's come in here, that's shown up. So that's a cool little setting that you can use for glass. I think they even have it on that and your Disney material and other materials like that. That basically creates this interesting. You can see right here it says film thickness and film IOR. So you can set a really cool effect for like soap bubbles and things like that very easily and quickly using this thin film coating preset. But we're really not going to do that. Most of your items that you're going to be creating doesn't have that. So let's go ahead and start adding our images. So what we'll do here is we're going to go to, you can either go to add here or you can hit Shift A, and we're going to go to texture, and you can import multiple images right here. And let's go ahead and go to what we're going to be using, which for me is the concrete 4K PNG. For you, all you really need to do if you want to get some PBR materials, go to texturehaven.com, and you can go to textures, and let's do a search for concrete. And this is the one I'm using right here with these lines in it. So if you want to use exactly the one that I'm using, you can go ahead and download this one. You just click on this material, download all the materials, and you can use it from there. So very, very, very simple to get some PBR materials, or at least some textures. So we're going to go in there, and we're going to select a couple things. We want the bump, we want the diffuse, we want the, actually, we're not going to do displacement on this one. We're just going to do regular materials for now. PBR materials, but without a full displacement. So normal, the roughness, and the specularity. So let's go ahead and import multiple images. Now, one thing that I actually don't particularly like is that it does kind of set them not in the correct order. You can see here that you have the concrete bump on the top, you have the diffuse next, and so on. So unfortunately, it doesn't order them according to the last name and what the type is to be plugging into the material inputs, but that's really not that big of a deal. We can just kind of move these around. So let's take the roughness, put it here, normal, let's put down here, specular, let's move it up here, and roughness there, and this should be just fine. Okay, so what you'll see here, and what they added is very similar to the Node Wrangler add-on, where you can hit Control Shift and left click an object or one of your materials, and you can see the material has been unwrapped here. And if we take a look at this, you can actually go into here. There's a randomized tiling situation where if you have something that you want more procedural, you can kind of click on that, but let's not really worry about that right now. And you can see here there's a checkbox for a normal map, which we'll worry about later. And I think the most important thing that you need to know about in regards to this is that you can actually change the look of your 2D image right here with the gamma setting and the brightness. So you can make this darker by going to, like, let's say a 4.2 or something like that for the gamma. And you can change the brightness levels and the gamma settings here. We're just going to leave this as normal for now. And of course, you have different types of projections here. You can do flat or box projection, depending on how you're dealing with that particular object. You can set it to repeat, clamp, black or white values, and you can change your image down here, whether it's an animated set of images, an image sequence, a movie file, whatever it is, you can kind of set that from here. But for most of what you're going to be doing, I would imagine this is pretty much how you're going to end up setting this. So the next thing here, you can see that there's a 2D mapping one here. And a lot of times you want to map, even though you've UV unwrapped it, you want to map it or tile it more times or less times, depending on what you want it to look like. And that's where you'll want to add this 2D mapping right here. And you can actually select the UV map just like that. And you can take this, click and drag, and push that into all of the inputs for your images. I'm just going to sort of like zoom out a little bit here because it does get a little crazy when you have all of these images on here. And what's really cool is you can actually box select by left clicking and dragging and hitting the H button or hide to hide and unhide those images. So with the mapping node right here, all you really need to do, take the UV scale, make that like a 3 or something like that, whatever you want it to be. And I actually want these to run the opposite way. I want the lines to sort of go up the piece, kind of like this. So you can actually rotate this 90 degrees, and there you have a different orientation for that background, or this particular object here, how it's projecting that image. So then what you can do here is just take this, plug it right into that material, and we can control, shift, and left click. And now we're going to look through the material. I'm just going to move this a little bit. And then we can take the specular, throw that into the specularity, take the roughness, throw that into the roughness. And one of the more important things here, and this is a point of contention, if you have an AMD card and you're using 2.4, you're going to have system crashes most likely. So that's my recommendation to get 2.5 beta. You'll need to click this button here for the normal map, and it will convert. You can see right here, it converted that into what's called bump. So if I take that out, you can see that it's just color. But if you click the normal map, it now becomes a bump output. Okay, so you want to take that, pipe that directly into the bump material input, and there you have your normal map. You can see it's uh, directing the light different ways. And you can change the strength of that by just clicking here where it says height and going to 0.1. You can change that to very, very, slight sort of bumpiness or normalized texture there. And a 1 will be the exported material, whatever that was set to. Now, if you have a bump map here and you want to use that, you can go to Shift A to add, and then in Utilities, you can see where it says bump right there. You can take that, take the color, pop that right into the value. And so instead of using this for the normal map here, you can take this out and you can throw this bump right in here. And that will create that bumpy texture. Now, what's important is that you can see the sampling distance here is set to a certain point, so you can hover over that and read what that does. And right here where it says bump height, this is the actual strength. So if you put this at a 0.1, you can see how much that affects it. And that's why it starts usually at a 0.001, is because it wants it to be pretty small at first. And then you can sort of like change that value as you can either hit this right arrow here and increase it, or you can type in a value like 0.1 here, whatever it is that you want to do. And just to take another look at this sampling distance here, just to make sure that I don't gloss over this too much. You can see here it says distance to use when picking 2 points on the surface for bump gradient calculation. Use smaller values if procedural bump textures with very fine details don't show up. Don't show a bump effect. Does not affect bump sampling of image textures. So basically, if you're using like, if I hit Shift A here and you go to texture, if you're using any of these, it's gonna, or the texture blender. If you're using any of these procedural textures, it's gonna affect that. But if you're using an image, it's not gonna really do anything. All right. So let's go ahead and take that bump from the normal map, because normals I think tend to look a little bit better, and throw that into there, and there you go. So there you have your normal map put in. One more thing I'd like to mention to anybody who is an AMD GPU user, or if you have one of the other areas where I found that version 2.4 was crashing quite a bit was when adding a color ramp, which is very important when you're making PBR materials. Sometimes the exported either JPEGs or PNGs or whatever it is that you have are not quite what you want it to be, and you want to adjust it with a color ramp if it's a black and white value like this, or whatever it is that you're trying to do to create your materials. When I was using version 2.4, it crashed a lot when I used this color ramp here. So that's another reason why you really want to grab version 2.5. Beta 1 is what it's called right now. That one I can tell you right now, as you can see here, it's working beautifully, and I am having no issues. I haven't had any crashes or any hangups or anything like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and continue. So let's go ahead and take a look at a more sophisticated material. Or so let's go ahead and take a look at this leather ball that I created here. And I'm going to show you generally how I did this with a triplanar mapping method. And this kind of goes into procedural methods of doing materials, but not really because it uses the UV unwrap along with this triplanar method. So let's just go quickly into it. So you can see here that for the diffuse part of this ball, I changed the gamma to a 4, and I don't have any other 2D mapping in here, but I have all this other stuff. So I have a diffuse, I have a roughness, and I have a normal map right here. I do have some displacement effects going on down here, but I don't have it plugged in, and I will show you how that works on a later tutorial. But if we take a look here, what I've done is I've created a triplanar method of basically mapping this object. So what it means is that it kind of uses a procedural technique. And all you need to do is go to add, mapping, 3D mapping node, like this. And you can see here that I set the scale. I click this little uniform button here, and you can set the scale to like a zero 0.5, a zero 0.2, whatever it is that you want to do. Remember, the smaller the scale here, the larger or more scaled up the image is going to be, and the larger the scale, the more tiled it's going to be. So if I hit a 2 here, you can see that there's more of those lines, and if I put a scale of a 0.5, you can see that there's less of them, and it's kind of like scaled up so that the image is a lot larger. And then what you'll want to do is for the normal map here, or your bump map, you need to have a triplanar bump map node. And if you click Shift A, add, and you go to triplanar bump mapping, you can see right here it even has a little button. If you forgot to add a 3D mapping node, it even has a button to help you along your way. So it's pretty great. And you can also use multiple textures here, but we're really not going to worry about that. The same thing applies for these here. You basically need a 3D mapping node and the triplanar mapping for regular images. So you have, this is the diffuse, this is the roughness. So just a regular triplanar mapping will do. And if you have a 3D mapping node already for your bump mapping or whatever it is that you made, you can just plug that right into the inputs for all of these other 3D mapping so that when you change this, it changes them all at the same time. One thing I didn't really go too far into is this right here for the clear coat. If you hit a 1 right here, it basically adds a layer of clear coat on the top, and you can change the glossiness and all that right in there. And of course, metallic just makes it a metal or a non-metal. So if you do have an image map that you want to put in there, you can to sort of drive how the metals are working. I will be covering metals on a different in a different tutorial because there are some other particulars with different nodes that you might want to use besides this PBR material here, or this PBR material node here. And pretty much that's going to be it for this tutorial. Hopefully you were able to learn how to take your PBR textures and load it into this engine. And from there, basically you add those textures, you create procedurals or whatever it is that you want to do, and you can render from there. Thanks a lot for watching, and if you liked this tutorial and you'd like to see more, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys next time on DJ.